Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. This is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. And I have coroner Bob Fowler with me today. Let's hear from him about what it is like to be a coroner and what writers get wrong. Here's a little bit about his
First
backstory.
piece, I graduated from pharmacy school in 1972, but before that, I started when I was 18 years old um, as a volunteer firefighter. So with firefighting, you did firefighting, EMS, and hazmat. So the goal originally when I went to pharmacy school was to finish pharmacy school, and then I thought it would be great to be a trauma surgeon.
Hmm.
But if you look in 1972, the issue was there were 10 applicants for every spot in medical school.
Hmm.
And so I was ruled out. I already had a pharmacy degree. So I fell to the bottom of the list and I applied a couple times. Didn't matter. But that part of the EMS and the fact that I wanted to attempt to be a trauma surgeon, trauma was fascinating.
Hmm.
And so even in school, in pharmacy school, I took every one of the rotations I could get. And then part of those were actually a pathology rotation. It was anatomy and pathology, and it was through Boulder Community Hospital. And I went to all the autopsies I could attend because they were fascinating, just so much to learn.
Hmm.
And then I did some of the rotations down at University Hospital because it was on Colorado Boulevard. And I did a lot of the surgical rotations, sit in the dome and watch all these kinds of surgery. And then I did a couple other ones, an IV therapy class that was out at the old Fitzsimmons Army Hospital. And with that, they did other surgeries. And so you started with the patient, the whole history. They ordered the IV. You went to the IV room, mixed it, came back, stuck the patient, and then you did that. So all those things were just highly fascinating to me, of part of the whole process. So by the time I got to pharmacy school, I'd already been an EMT. No, I hadn't been an EMT then, but I worked through fire EMS systems here. And then I came back and I was in the second EMT class for the state of Colorado. About that time, the doctor, um, I've been out of school a while. I got out in 72, finished all that in 73. And in 1978, the doctor that was pathologist or was the coroner here was older and he was going to retire from his practice. And so I talked to him, I could, he says, okay. And then I ran for coroner, but from October on, actually before the election, he quit going on calls. And so I worked with him for a bit and I actually did all of his calls. And then worked with him very closely. And then once I was elected in November and I took over in 1979 is when I started as coroner. Before that, I actually went to Denver and I'm going to forget his name. It's many years ago. George, little Asian guy, was the coroner in Denver. And through common friends, I got to go up and spend some Friday, Saturday, Sundays working with their coroner's office, getting a multitude of experience. And at that point, they don't have nice buildings like now. They actually had rollaway beds and you slept in the morgue. So you slept in the morgue room with all 100 coolers where bodies were in because you were on call.
Oh my
So
gosh. Even in a big city like Denver.
yeah, they didn't at that point. Now it's all different. They have these people on call and they have regular facilities, but it was the basement of Denver General Hospital. But it was a great experience. All the stuff I got to see on those weekends, because of the volume, they had way more than we would get here.
Mm.
So that allowed me to get a lot of experience uh, in seeing multiple deaths of multiple kinds. And, I sure remember a lot of them that we saw because we wouldn't see them here. And I still haven't seen some of them, but you were able to get a very concise, you know, experience in that 3 days was just absolutely amazing. The things you got to see and the things you got to do. So it really sparked my interest more and more. Uh, then in the 80s, we decided as a group in the state we would form a coroners association. There had not been one. So I was on, I did not get to go to the very first organizational meeting, but I never missed one after that. And then once we set that up, I was the first treasurer, and then I was on the original board of directors all that period of time. And then I got off of that a few years ago. And then um, as of June of this year, I'm back on the board of directors uh, because I semi-retired as a pharmacist, and so I have more time. And so now I'm on the legislative committee for our board of directors that's going to monitor all the legislation involving anything around death, uh, hazmat. The whole realm is what I'm going to be looking at. And we had our first meeting with lobbyists this week. So pretty interesting to understand um, being, again, I retired after 45 years as a firefighter, hazmat, EMS person.
Mm.
So I retired from that, but again, I was still coroner. So I have a really understanding of a lot of what law enforcement does, what hazmat, what fire service does, what EMS has to do. And as coroner, I work with them. So it's given me a real opportunity to have some pretty good involvement with all fire, EMS, hazmat groups in this entire end of the state. And I did not actually quit the fire service. I went from an active actual volunteer to retired, but I'm on the board of directors of the Rural Fire District, and the Rural Fire District owns all the equipment. We pay 40% of the wages with the city, and I'm actually been treasurer of that. So I still have a very large impact in making all the future decisions for fire, EMS, and hazmat through our local group. So I still pretty much involved with that service also. So it's, yeah, pretty interesting. Been a really good, but I really, the fascination with anatomy pathology is really where I was in pharmacy school. And so being into the coroner's job really fits that very well. And the coroner's job um, is quite involved. Nobody sees quite what you do. The most common conception is we sort of laughingly call it finger pointing and go DRT, dead right there. And that's the farthest from the truth. And then from, yeah, I know that's everybody, that's kind of what everybody thinks coroners are, just a DRT. And that is not the case. It's a very thorough investigation. And then partly from what um, NCIS, all of those things have a very large impact on what we do because you hear the comments, well, I watch NCIS or, oh, I watch Criminal Minds. Okay, well, they fix those things. Can't you put it on your big board and move your finger? I said, understanding those are theatrical presentations. They're not, let me shut this up. Hang on. Okay. Those are not real situations. And classically, when I've talked about those in public, because I've done some public speaking, and I think the best is when I saw one of those. They had a body in the swamp in Florida, and it was a perfect head. The alligators need it. Been out there for days, and the head is perfect. I said, you understand, that is not real. So that those shows have had a big impact on what we do because people actually think the coroner has all that magic equipment. And I mean, I laugh at some of that with the big boards that they have on all those shows. And in an hour, they go from a complicated homicide to solving the whole thing and going to court, which is
I
the
wanna
far.
I wanna pause you right there just for a second so people who are watching this can be totally on the same page. So you're saying obviously there are lots of misconceptions about coroners, and that's what we're here to talk about. And you seem like the perfect person to ask. But for anybody who doesn't know, is there a difference between a coroner, a medical examiner, some of these terms, a pathologist that you've been throwing around? Can we just get a
Yes.
definition in place and then start expanding to
Yeah, the
some of
coroner
the
by
issues?
state statute are, the definition is that my job is to determine cause and manner of death. Okay. Manner can be homicide, suicide, uh, natural, unattended, or undetermined, and that's the manner. So we know that's the manner, but what is the cause? What is the very basic cause?
Mm,
Uh, you're in a car wreck, so you have multiple blunt force trauma, but was alcohol involved? Was drugs involved? Uh, if you died in that car wreck and there was no bleeding whatsoever and your legs are ripped off, then that is probably going to be a natural death from previous medical situations.
mm,
If somebody's in a car wreck today, but they don't die for 2 years from those injuries, that's death in a delayed degree. So
mm,
you have to go through that and research backwards to day one when that occurred. Older people, and I have a lot of older people at home. Uh, anyway, coroner is cause and manner, and that's what we have to do.
mm,
Medical examiner situations are like City of Denver is a medical examiner situation. So they're actually, because they run their own, their coroner is a pathologist. And so they do a lot more autopsies than we do here. They have a staff of even investigators that there's an American Board of Death Investigator, AMBDI. Every one of their investigators has to be AMBDI certified. I don't have to do that because
mm,
I'm the coroner. But at the same time, I don't do the autopsies. So I do everything is the on scene investigation. I do the notification next to kin. I do the pulling of all the medical records from the patient. Then I write a full report. I'm on scene and do all the pictures on scene. And then I submit that with a request with my report to the pathologist, who is really a medical examiner, to do the autopsy to come back with the final cause and manner of death to match what I have seen on scene.
mm,
So, coroner really is, and there's a whole multitude of things that the coroner is responsible for: unattended deaths, deaths in public institutions, which can be prisons, nursing homes, long-term care facilities. We have some of those senior care homes where a family keeps like 6 elderly people. Anything that takes that money, that becomes a public institution. All those deaths are reportable to the coroner and they have to be investigated. So we do that. Anybody that dies in surgery, anybody that comes in and dies in the emergency room, uh, the list of those goes on and on.
mm,
Anybody that's admitted to a hospital and dies within 24 hours. Anybody that's, no matter how long, even if they're in a nursing home, they could have been a gunshot to the head and they live 24 years, uh, then they have to call, because then it's up to me to investigate that back to day one. And that's called death in a delayed degree. But if it is something of a potential homicide, they were shot by somebody else, or a drunk hit the car, or all of those issues, those have to be looked at to go backwards to that period of time, pending any kind of those legal charges. So I have that responsibility, and it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you have to know a lot about that. Anything in public transportation, taxi cabs, buses, planes, trains, those are all involved. When it comes to even airplanes, if it's military, that's one issue, because if it's a military crash, and believe it or not, I've been fortunate, I've had a B-52 and a B-1B crash in my area, uh, because they were not on government land, on private, which is, private ownership. Those become then a national security site.
mm,
And especially with the B-1B, I had an armed guard with me 24 hours a day, because it was just after the B-1Bs were released and they crashed south of our town. So those are involved. Airplane crashes of any other type of airplane crash, then I'm reportable to the Federal Aviation Administration, the National Transportation Safety Board, Bureau of Aviation Safety, and then you have to evaluate the manufacturer of both the aircraft and airframe, and then the power plant. So that also then becomes involvement with all of those people in the aircraft manufacturing. So those are a situation you have to look at.
My
Uh,
goodness, I didn't realize that there was such an investigative aspect to coroner work. It sounds like that's a large portion of what you do is on-site investigation
oh,
and
and I
going
do.
back and
Going back, and you have to, you do all of that backwards. Automobile crashes, that those you work with the state patrol, but then even those vehicles are taken, and with the newer cars, they have a little black box. They take those, and then we work together in an investigation at times, even to figure out. Uh, they do a complete accident reconstruction, and they used to call that the art accident reconstruction team. That's now changed to the vehicular crimes unit, the VCU, because of all the different situations. And so I have direct involvement with the VCU officer from the state patrol. If there's hazmat involved, then I have some involvement with the hazmat officers. So yes, and there's a lot of cross jurisdictional things that go on because if it's in a city street ruled by the city here, uh, I have the right to call in the VCU to help us with that complete reconstruction. And that's again the same thing. We determine they do and get back to me with speeds, skid factors, and then part of what we have to look at with that then is the autopsy and toxicology reports that goes with that. If to determine all of those injuries, including were they alive before the wreck and they were not alive after the wreck. So yeah, a lot of people don't see those, and so I have a lot of involvement with that. Train crashes. Uh, Fortunately, I don't. I've never had anybody uh, die. Well, I've had one die in a train, in an Amtrak, but I've had cars get hit. Uh, we had a county road grader somehow got hit one time. We've had people lay on railroad tracks and get hit. All of those things, whether it's Amtrak or Burlington Northern Santa Fe, then I am responsible to working with uh, their law enforcement. They have the railroad police that I work with, and then they have a claims investigator that generally I work with very closely to get both pictures and reports and what we found, including then the medical history of the decedent once we get them identified. So that becomes involved with the Bureau of Railroad Safety.
So I have a question then. This is a huge slate of responsibilities, a huge breadth of work it sounds like that you're responsible for. So as I understand it, the coroner is an elected position and
Mhm.
there's one coroner for, a county or an area. For a busier area like Denver, is there there must be an entire team. Are they still responsible for the breadth of investigation and situations that you're describing, or is that more? I know that you come from a more rural county. Is that more typical of rural
No,
counties, or
they
can you
they
can
will
you
have their whole team, but they
tease
have a
that
lot
out
more
a bit?
access. Like if I have a critical situation where I'm not comfortable, even with my experience working with law enforcement, and I actually have the district attorney notified on almost every call. He says you don't have to. If you call, I'm coming that way. So I have the district attorney that I can talk to. Depending on the jurisdiction, if it's in the city or the county, then you work with the lead officer, and then we have the right to put in a joint request for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Versus even Colorado Springs, there is an elected coroner, but they're such a large area, they have their own criminal investigation unit through the police and the sheriff. Denver County has all of those things. I don't have those. We don't have those kind of resources. Most rural counties don't. And I even do some phone calls with the neighboring counties when they have some of these once or twice in a lifetime calls. Bob, how do I handle this? And
Mm.
so I do the consultation with them, and if they call me, I will go to those counties and I will help them with that investigation. But you have to think step ahead all the time. And I kind of look at those that till I can prove anything beyond a shadow of a doubt, I have a homicide. And so even if Grandma Smith is 99 and dies at home, you have to go in with the understanding what is going on here.
Mm,
And so, unattended at home, you look at that. What do you have when you have a decomposed body? And this year I've had, I haven't told them, either 12 or 14 decomposed bodies. So that becomes a major piece of the investigation. Can I prove medically that this person medically, I subpoena medical records from both physicians and hospitals in order to determine that full involved medical record and that medical history before I make a decision on those for an autopsy. Older people that die at home, um, they're fairly simple. You get the list of congestive failure, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, on and on and on and on, protein carrying malnutrition. Very simple to come up with what they died with.
mm,
Uh, some of them that come in, if there's a code blue situation to the emergency room, um, I do like teaching some. And so if they have somebody comes into the ER on any kind of the cases, a code blue at home, a car wreck, a gunshot, uh, potential drug overdose, then I respond to the ER and do the same thing on scene investigation. But then I would send law enforcement to the scene where it occurred and sequester that scene, even to the point if we have to have a search warrant to go through the house to look for other information. And that's another piece people don't see is I have a lot of input on a lot of these cases that I will do the on-scene investigation, do a little piece of what I determine around the death, but then I'm done, and they sequester the house and get a search warrant so we can do an absolute thorough search of the house. That even goes with cases of uh, unexpected deaths in infants or children.
mm.
We do the same thing. The those sudden unexpected deaths in infant or children, um, we get the same thing in that if they code blue at the hospital, now you have to sequester the house. And you got to get a search warrant to go backwards to see. And again, people don't see all the stuff I have to do. Is a cohabitation. You're not supposed to have these kids in bed with you. Um, Example, I could tell you a couple of years ago, the mom and dad had a water bed and the kid was between them and got his mouth down on the water bed. So basically suffocated. Now, we then I can work with law enforcement and the district attorney. Is this now a chargeable offense of child abuse?
So that would
So
be an example of something that um, that you have plenty of experience with, but that the investigative divisions would handle in a larger city, or is that typical? Like, do all coroners go out to those, to search homes and things like that when a crime has been committed, just to gather information for the manner and cause of death?
well, part of the time, yes, and part of the time, no, because I'm very careful about separating what is law enforcement investigation, what is the coroner investigation. I have to determine everything for cause and manner of death, and I can at the scene if we have somebody die and they have 300 bottles of pills. Yes, I will take those. They get inventoried. That list gets sent to autopsy. If there's an other situations, and I can tell you one, we had a decomposed body not long ago. We got him out of the house, um, and we knew from his neighbors this guy was a train wreck. I could have put the 32 things on the wall and thrown a dart, three darts, and those top three I could have signed the death certificate. But because of the situation, he had no family here. In order to go into the house now, the right way to look for mail, checkbooks, keys, I can't do that. And so we went to court and got a search warrant the next morning. And then we went back in and with the police officer, and we collected as much as we could find that we thought we needed for mail. They put that in evidence, and the next day we went through all the mail and including finding family is how we got the family notified. But that had to be by search warrant because that's above and beyond what cause and manner of death is going to do. So even if we know we have a drug house where somebody's died, I can research around the body. So if they have the foils, they have the syringes, they have the bunny burner, all the stuff. I can do anything right there. Now, if I find those foil wrappers, I don't take those. Those need to be tested by the police. And if we still lock the house up, because on those, when we do an autopsy, if something comes back that we've expected it's a drug death, but they got a gunshot wound to them, now that changes that complexity. And actually, that happens. I'm going to go to court in October for one that they thought was electrical short a couple of years ago in a garage that the guy burned to death in. But I said, I'm not comfortable with this. You could smell gasoline, bad thing. It didn't look right. We brought in CBI, we did the autopsy, and he both had gunshot wounds and stab wounds. But we did that by the right process. And some of the time, it's truly my gut feeling is like, no, what I'm seeing doesn't fit what I'm seeing. And so we go with that. So that situation, you get the full search warrant, you again sequester the house, and then you bring in the CBI, the investigative team. Part of what they do then is separate from what I have to do. I may know some of that information, but that becomes then law enforcement with district attorney to file charges. I still go back to the cause and manner of death that I can determine from what I saw and then the autopsy. So there is somewhat of a separation with that, that I do try to very carefully separate law enforcement piece versus the coroner piece. And I never look at the reports unless I really need them, uh, with exception of state patrol, and I get those records because I need to know speed and skid distance and those sort of things. But on the other ones like that, no, unless it's important, even being prepped to go to court, I don't see those reports. That's law enforcement, not the coroner.
Hmm.
Now it's different on TV. Again, when you see all those things, you hear those where people, the coroner knows everything about all the police investigation. It goes on and on and on. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. But that's, again, it's a TV show. And that's where these shows on TV really have an impact on what I do. And even when I go to court, what I do.
Hmm.
And it even has affected some of the lawyers once in a while. Because at times I will testify in court for my entire on-scene investigation, my pictures, and sometimes even the autopsy report. And I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother me. But then they go off like, well, you've seen it. Well, in your opinion, had he been shot, but had he been a mile from a trauma center, could they have saved him? You know, that's defense attorneys. Well, the answer is, first, I'm not going to answer that because he wasn't. He was 10 miles south of La in the prairie. So that's irrelevant. Well, let me rephrase that. And they try to do that. And I don't play that game. I am very, very careful how I speak when I go to court. Uh, I usually don't even have to be prepped by the district attorney because I know my reports, I know my pictures to go to court. So all that gets involved with what people don't see. There's just a lot of involvement. Think of all the kind of deaths that I cover. If somebody commits suicide, I do not take possession of a gun, period. That's law enforcement. They need to determine the ballistics with that. That's not my case. I'm going to look for an entrance exit wound, and I don't identify those. I said I'll find 2 wounds on the head because that's going to be up to the pathologist during the autopsy to determine entrance and exit, because those can fool you. And then that way I can actually say, I am not a ballistics expert. I don't, same thing with blood splatter. They say, well, this and this, and so that's fine. Here's the body that I dealt with. You come up with what you do. That's law enforcement, not cause and manner of death.
So at what point, sorry to cut you off there. So at what point are you the one who recommends an autopsy then, or can, or is it the police, law enforcement that that initiate that, or is it just automatic under certain circumstances that an
Under
autopsy?
certain circumstances, it's automatic. We don't, anybody that we know that's motor vehicle crashes, plane crashes, school bus crashes, somebody gets hit by a train. I've even, you know, yeah, we're going to do an autopsy. We got to find out everything. We got to find the full medical record. We also want that autopsy to show if they had a medical issue. And you've seen that in car wrecks, that the wreck was caused by medical issue. And I've had several of those. Um, but then we want to do the full toxicology, and even toxicology, we hope we have enough that we do both vitreous, if we can, heart, blood, and then urine. And so we do toxicology 3 ways to look at even the blood alcohol. So very, very careful with those, that I want the most complete results that I can get. It's very important.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So for the writers of TV shows and books that are still to come, what advice would you give those people? Like what are some of those things that people don't talk about or don't see about a coroner's job that you would like to see included? Or what are some common misconceptions besides what you've already mentioned that people should avoid repeating just because it's out there and we don't know better. Help us to know better.
Yeah, well, it's just how complicated it is and how time consuming it is. Uh,
Mm,
I know we get a lot of bad publicity that somebody's dead today. Why did it take 6 weeks to find family? Okay, that's one of the big things that comes up. Well,
mm,
the reason is, and again, this has changed in the time I've been coroner. I have a lot of homeless people now. Okay,
mm,
that changes because not all those people can walk into like my house. They would know my wife, they'd know my kids. My kids know where my file is. Here's the file, everything's set. You can't do that with some of these people. Uh, and so there's that misconception that we can identify a person, again, from the TV shows. It's all done in an hour. No, that's not correct. And to be real honest, I just uh, finished one last week that was between 2 and 3 weeks out because it was in an unoccupied house. And some of the things you hear about is abandoned versus unoccupied. Those are separate. Okay. Somebody breaks into an unoccupied house, that doesn't mean it's abandoned. Okay. And so we get that comments all the time. Well, was that just an abandoned house? No, it was unoccupied. They broke in and were living there. Anyway, this gal that was down, and she'd been in there since August 1st, and they found her last time anybody's seen her, and she was one of our locals, known as a doper. They didn't find her till the 16th of August, and we'd had those 100-degree days.
mm,
Uh, Originally, even with that, the police thought in this house living there had been one of the local doper guys. So we just simply identified the body as John Doe, let it go at that. But again, we did all the stuff. She had the foil wrappers. And when we sent that to autopsy as John Doe, um, what goes through with an autopsy, it's a whole process, which is another piece I'll get back to. They came back for the first scan and said, no, that's a female. It was like,
mm,
oh, okay, well, they don't know who this is. And then some of the friends took them over 2 weeks to decide, well, we haven't seen Jane Doe, so what can we do about it? And then it started getting with families, and that opened on a late Sunday night, like 9 o'clock. Uh, and when they did the scan, they found out she'd had both hips and a shoulder replaced.
mm,
So I said, that's fine. Put the body, and we put them in a freezer because she was decomposed. I said, take out the right hip, all of the pieces for that replacement joint, get them cleaned and scrubbed, and get me the serial numbers.
mm,
And so then there's only 5 or 6 manufacturers. And so I just went down the list and finally identified who the manufacturer was. But there's still concerns of HIPAA violations. They couldn't tell me where it was. And then one of the family members came forward and said, here's where she had the surgery. I said, all right. So then I used my power to get medical records, and I was able to get the three pieces of that hip hardware, was able to identify who it was and when it was. That became then the positive identification of the body, and I go back to the family. But that took almost between 3 and 4 weeks from the time she died. So it's a long process.
Wow,
Uh,
yeah.
I still have a body that's 4 years out, uh, that we've tried to find family, found him committed suicide in a car, and well planned, poured 2 gallons of Coleman fuel in the car so it burned up. But we think we know who he is, and we've even done, of course, now we don't have fingerprints. We had a little brain tissue, and we found stuff in the car, and the family says, no, nope, that's not who it is. So that's still a pending one. That's why when you see cold case files, those cold case files can be very old, because there's no simple way to meet all of those requirements and
Mm.
define who you have. So, yeah, that kind of beats around the bush your question, but it's a very time consuming process to identify people.
Mm.
Uh, we do use, I even use the state patrol. They now have their portable scanners that they can carry, that they can scan the fingers. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, depending on how long they've been dead. For car wrecks and some homicides, we get those answers really quick. We can make that positive ID before we even start to find family. But that becomes involved. Uh, Again, can be uh, a slow process trying to find families. Even sometimes when people die in low income housing, even down here we have that. Their records are not always the best, and they have an emergency notifications numbers, but they really don't pursue that, and that becomes an issue for me to try to find next of kin. And we have the search engines, and there are some tricks we know in law enforcement, and the sheriff and the DA are very good to help me with that, to try to find that. But again, it can take quite an extremely lengthy period of time to notify a family. And so even some of the writers, we know that it's like, well, why did it take 6 or 8 weeks? Well, because we spent every day working on this
Mm.
because of these people and the homeless, uh, or somebody that just rents an apartment. The property owner doesn't care if you sign the contract and pay me. It's not up to me to determine who your home medical record family is. And so that becomes one of the issues. It can be very, very time consuming and lengthy till we identify a person and get next of kin notified. And then what happens is you hear sometimes about unclaimed bodies, and I know that's common. Uh, Very frequently, we have somebody that may be here that's got family in Detroit. They've been estranged from the family for 25 years, and you finally find them. They said, basically, I don't know, and I don't care. Thank you, but I said, well, then I have to find closest living next of kin, and that's another issue that I'm responsible for in that pecking order, to be able to even verbally let me do an emergency cremation. So all that becomes involved in even what would be considered a simple unattended death at home.
My goodness. So I just have one more question for you. Since you have been a coroner in this space for 40 plus years, obviously you mentioned search engines, you mentioned the fingerprint scanners, things that I'm sure were not, you know, in use really when you first started. What are some just broad strokes? I'm sure there's a huge amount that's changed big and small over that time, but if somebody were trying to capture, for instance, what it was like to be a coroner in the 80s versus what it's like to be a coroner in the 2020s, what are some of the big differences that you've seen?
The, the, the different types of deaths. We didn't have a lot of drug deaths. Um, that's a change. Even the technology has changed. Back then, uh, I could use a local pathologist just to do the autopsy, and they could run some labs through the hospital, and we'd be fine. Even photography now. Um, Back then, we used Polaroid cameras. I could do an immediate picture at the scene. And then for a while, then I liked cameras, so I always kept a really good 35 millimeter camera, and you would do those pictures with the 35 millimeter, but you may not know for a while if you didn't get that roll of film developed right quick, were your pictures good or not good.
Hmm.
So that's really a big change. The age of the computers, I can take my computer now with me on scene. Back then, I did a lot of either typed or handwritten reports. They were fine. They were 1 or 2 pages. And, now identify when I do the pictures. Now I do my report. I can do addendums. Uh, that has made it so much better. You have to make sure back then you could do a 10-line description. Mrs. Jones died at home. She was 85 years old, and the doc said she had end stage congestive failure and kidney failure. Okay, I'm done. Well, even a simple dying at home now, I look at those medical records, and it can be 2 pages long.
Hmm.
And instead of a DRT and get those records, now I make sure the reports are correct because we also have more responsibility. It's changed where I get a lot of insurance questions. I have to make sure death certificates are fine for families because there's houses, cars, property that has to be done right. Uh, Everything I try to do is cleared by the district attorney. Uh, he knows my reports. There's a certain fashion those reports have to be done in now, and when I teach these guys, it's called SOAP. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It's very common in medicine. It's SOAP. It's subjective, objective assessment in your plan.
Hmm.
And I have to use that even when I get a first phone call that said, all right, this is dispatch. We have an unattended death at XY address. Okay, do you have any information for me? Well, no, but I'll have the officer call you. Thank you. One of the things I have to consider now with the craziness, my first question is the scene safe? I'm not going to go if the scene's not safe. If
Hmm.
there's been a gunshot, is it safe for me to go in there?
Hmm.
When I started, we didn't have that. That's
Hmm.
You think about the gunshots and the threats and uh, the things that have occurred uh, in that number of years. Now I have digital technology with a camera, and that digital technology, and I have a pretty high grade camera, has changed completely because very frequently I'll go in, do my pronouncement, do my initial scene investigation. It's held now by law enforcement. I go back to my vehicle and I look at the pictures because digital shows a lot that the eye doesn't pick up.
Hmm.
And it's very critical. And I even teach that some law enforcement, don't ever take it on your cell phone. If you have a digital, use a digital only. And so I do that, and then I disappear and I go back and look at those pictures. Even now with the good technology, I have a little Kodak printer that I can carry in my truck. And if I think there's some critical, I can print that picture right then to give it to law enforcement. Where before you'd have to go to one of the companies to get your 1 hour development, where now digital is much better. Way back when on some of the cases, for a while, I had a secretary at the DA's office and I carried a small recorder. I would record the case as I go and then she would type it. Now with the computer, it's much better because, again, and even my deputy and the people I teach, you do it by the SOAP process. Subjective. What do I have? When you call me on the phone and when I'm writing a report, here's what I was told. Objective. When I get to the scene and meet with law enforcement or wherever it is, they give me another story. Does that match what I saw up above? Okay. Assessment. Now, I'm going to take subjective, objective. I'm going to make a look at the house, look at the car, look at the plane, look at the train, whatever I have to do. I'm going to make that assessment. And I write my report the same way that when I get there, I was told this story, this match, I went in, da 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 da. And then P is my plan. And I do that both with pictures and my full reports. We
Hmm.
didn't do that years ago. This is very precise because everything you do now becomes a legal document. and that
Mm.
report has to be that way. So when it goes to court, that's completely different than it was when I started. There were very few lawsuits and arguments and disgruntled families. Uh, so I need to be that expert when it comes up for anything, even with an insurance company. How did you do that? Well, here's my report. Here's exactly what it shows. So that's changed completely in that number of years. It's completely different. More laws are out there. Uh, those have changed. I have a very good district attorney. I've always gotten along very well with all the elected district attorneys that have been in our judicial district. They're very good. And so it's just way different.
Mm.
Back then, I didn't do the number of calls. Right now, with all these changes with hospice patients and nursing home patients, public institutions, law enforcement, um, all of those things, we didn't have a lot of that back then. And
Mm.
now we do. I've even had a couple of suicides in the holding cell here at the jail because the city doesn't have a jail. They go with the county. But we've had a couple of suicides. That becomes an issue for law enforcement. Okay. Would they have been watched? What were they missed? Were they suicidal? That has all changed completely. And so those responsibilities are far greater than they've ever have to been. I have to know a lot more about a lot of these other agencies that I have to deal with. And you've already heard that all the different agencies that I'm responsible to are pretty incredible. Uh, you heard about plane crashes. Those are incredible number that you deal with, all the way from airframe and power plant and the railroads. If it's with the Santa Fe, then um, I'm drawing a blank right now on the federal agency responsible for the railroad safety. But then I end up working with those on those cases. So that's very critical. We actually had a guy drop dead in an Amtrak dining car a couple years ago. Uh, and so then Amtrak's very curious about that. Another railroad institution. We had a railroad employee catch an Amtrak back from where he took a train, died in one of the Amtrak coach cars 2 years ago. Now, because he was still in there, is that a workman's comp injury? So you
Mm.
have to look at that. So even workman's comp is a whole different situation. People don't see that I'm responsible also to answering to uh, the Consumer Product Safety Commission if somebody dies from a consumer product.
Mm.
I've had some of those over the years. So I sequester the product, I sequester the house. It's all sealed until I deal with the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So I have to think about those and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a huge amount that's changed. I guess I would expect nothing less. Well, thank you again for taking some time with me, Mr. Fowler, to help me and my audience here. This is going to go live in a couple weeks. Understand what writers get wrong about coroners, and there is so much that we don't generally understand as the public who don't deal with these kinds of issues on a regular basis. So thank you for.
Yeah, it's just, and there's just a lot. I
Yeah.
mean, I go into a lot of different cases I've seen, but
Oh, I bet
again, they
you
don't
could.
see, like the military, when they had the B-1B, it only been cleared by the government 2 weeks before. So and the B-52 was the same way. So the B-1B especially was a national security site. So I had a guy in a Jeep 24 hours a day, and it's like, and you learn a lot, even at that situation. I tell people it's very scientific how we tried to find body parts. They brought in all the trailers with the lights and guards with night vision goggles. When the cars would show up, they'd turn the lights on. That's where you go look for body parts. Very scientific, very scientific, worked very well. So you look at all those things, and there's just so many things out there that people don't see what we do and the length of time it takes. I wished I had all the stuff. And again, when I see NCIS and those other programs, they have those fancy lights to find blood. Well, there's no such thing. We don't have that. And again, rural areas. I was criticized a little over a year ago for a car wreck um, that people don't even understand. It was out, the lady was turning off Highway 50 to go to her house, and it's a 45-mile-an-hour speed zone on Highway 50. And a guy in a pickup with no registration hit her at 75 miles an hour. Now, yes, she turned in front of him, but we sequestered that scene for many hours with her in the vehicle because the initial, when the skid marks showed he was violating the law. Now he can be charged. And again, that hasn't been to court yet. That's something people don't see. It's like, well, why did it take him 10 hours to move a body? There's a reason.
Mm,
If you move the body, you destroy the evidence. And so we look at that evidence on my part, cause and manner, law enforcement for legality. So, yeah, all those things play a role into it every time.
wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I'm gonna let you go. But this has been super interesting, super informative, and I'm glad we could make this work.
Yes, if you ever need information, I'm always am available, and I try to be for anybody. I try to be a wealth of information from all this as a teaching program.
Okay, is there any way that people like that you recommend people get in touch with you if they have a quick question that they think you could help with?
Sure. You've seen the website for the county, and I carry a, they can either do the email through the county website. They have questions, even if they've had some crazy case, I can probably give them a lot of information about that by asking some more specific questions.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to let you go, but
All right.
this has been wonderful. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to have the email in the description box down below. That was a really interesting interview. I had a good time talking to Mr. Fowler about all of his experiences, hearing all the things that he does. Hopefully, you got a lot of good information from that as well. If you enjoyed this, then definitely check out the other interviews on the channel. Like this video if you like it, and subscribe for more from Carly Stevens Books. All right, till next time.